Good evening and welcome to this virtual leadership talk sponsored and supported by the Clergy and Lay Leadership Development Team of the Desert Southwest Conference of the United Methodist Church. My name is Ken, and as a member of the Clergy and Lay Leadership Development Team, I'm privileged to be your host this evening. Our guest presenter tonight is Sharon Scanlan. She's an active member of the Vista de la Montaña United Methodist Church in North Tucson. She and her family have been active Methodists for 7 generations in Wisconsin and in Cornwall, England. She graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Madison with a degree in retailing and spent 33 years with Sears. Her career focus was in store and operations management in many different positions that she held throughout the West. During the last 13 years of her career, she was a regional vice president based out of Chicago headquarters. She has belonged to many Methodist churches around the country and has been a member of Vista United Methodist Church for 8 years. Previously, she was a member of the Prescott United Methodist Church for 11 years before moving to Saddlebrook in 2014. Sharon is currently the finance chair at Vista, and she leads weekly Bible study and volunteers for many worship duties. She occasionally preaches, and she's very active in the community, doing many different things, paper crafts and genealogy. She's just as busy as anybody can be. I want to start with a prayer, and my prayer comes right out of Scripture. What does Proverbs 29 say about leadership? Proverbs 29:14, quote, "A leader's credibility is based on how they uphold truth and fairness over their organization." This verse teaches us that honest and truthful leaders are appreciated and their legacy will be known long after their reign. So Sharon, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. I'm really pleased to see so many of you, and hopefully we'll have a good time together tonight. What we're going to talk about tonight is effective committee leadership. And if you want to go to the next slide, Alberta. The agenda, Ken just opened with the prayer and a very nice introduction. We're going to talk about what committee leadership is, how to create it, my meeting operating rules, which I've used throughout my life, what is good facilitation, and then I'm going to end up with a brief discussion about my favorite leadership book by Stephen Covey, and we'll talk about that, and then entertain questions and have a closing prayer. Well, Ken mentioned my Methodist history, and as Jeannie knows, I just got back from a trip to Cornwall and London late last month. And I actually proved that I was an 8th generation Methodist. So I'm very proud of that. Pastor Fred calls me an ancient Methodist. I just think that I'm a longtime Methodist. My family were miners in Cornwall, and they were all among the first people converted by John Wesley in the late 1700s when he traveled to Cornwall 40 times. This was actually the topic of a sermon I did in 2017. About his influence on converting the miners, and then when they came to the United States, to states all around, but particularly in my state, Wisconsin, they really started the first Methodist churches, which often were the first Protestant churches in many of the Midwestern states. And that's also true in Arizona. Prescott United Methodist was the first Protestant church in the state. The churches I belonged to when I was growing up were in Dodgeville and Mineral Point, which is a real Methodist stronghold. And everybody in that area basically were descended from miners, and they all pretty much were Methodist. I attended Hamlin University in St. Paul for my freshman year, and that's a small Methodist school that you may have heard of. And then, as Ken said, I went to UW-Madison. I'm a very proud Badger, very proud Packer fan, and most people know that about me. I have belonged to Methodist churches across the United States, from Hawaii to Chicago, and have had a lot of wonderful experiences in different churches. As he said, I worked for Sears. Unfortunately, we're no longer around, but it was a fabulous company to work for that was very ethical and a really great place to work with a family and environment. I retired 20 years ago, which you can do if you're with a company for 33 years, and I was able to retire at 55. And when I did, we left the Midwest and went to Prescott. I hate snow, and so I wanted to get out of snow as fast as we could. So we went to Prescott, and unfortunately, there's too much snow in Prescott. So that's why we're now in Saddlebrook. As he said, my background, I did a lot of different things. I had 19 different positions in 33 years, and it was mostly in stores and running stores and operations. And I really led every level of the organization, from a store all the way up to districts, regions, and territories, where you run basically 120 stores. So it was a very diverse background, and I loved it. I loved every minute of it, because I love customers. I love being with people. And it was really a wonderful experience. One of the benefits I had is that I worked for truly wonderful people. And I was often the only woman the first woman in a position. And I had people who really believed in me and were great mentors. And they also had great leadership skills. So I really felt I learned from a lot of the best. When I was retired, it allowed me to be more involved in the community. As many of you know, if you're working and you're traveling all the time, you really can't do a lot. So I was able really to get involved in Prescott at the Methodist Church. And there I was in trustees and then finance, and became finance chair, which I think is really the area I like the most, because I love finance, I love administration. I really enjoy financial analysis, so it all kind of fits together. When I came to Vista, I got involved with finance, and I became finance chair in 2015. It seems like a never-ending job. I'm still doing it, but I really do like it. Ken and I have worked together a great deal in the last 4 years, because we built a new building, and we are great partners together. I also started a class just before COVID, which is one we did at Prescott, and it's an ongoing class. We're in our 4th year, using disciplines and the lectionary. It's a terrific course, and I'll talk more about that later, because we do it solely on Zoom. I do a lot of other things at the church, and I have enjoyed preaching a few times, which is something that's been a real challenge, and one of those things that forces you to do something that's out of your comfort zone. Vista is a small church, and it's really run by the volunteers. We have a very tiny staff, and we have terrific volunteers that work with a really great staff. What is effective committee leadership? Well, I've been leading committees since 6th grade, when I was class president, and I've done it all through high school and through all of my positions at Sears. So it's something I'm really passionate about, and it's effective communication and running meetings. And communication and leadership go hand in hand in my mind. I think, and I feel really strongly about this, effective leadership is all about teamwork. And teamwork is being a great team leader, a team player, and working with other teams. And that's something in a church environment that's extremely important, is the cross-function teams and how they work together. And Valerie and Robin and I talk about this a lot, but you've really got to have communication between the worship committee and the staff, or the finance committee and SPRC. But the committees have to work together, and that comes out of being team players and really wanting. You can't be put your ego on the line and have that run how you're going to be a leader. You have to communicate. You have to work with other teams. I think leadership really utilizes the skills of members with diverse experiences, and that enhances ideas and solutions. I know in all the churches I've worked in, the backgrounds of the members are so diverse And everybody brings a skill and an experience and an idea set that you really learn from. I learn from everybody that comes into the church, particularly people that are new members. One of the things I love to do is go to the new member luncheons and meet people before they become members, because then you know what their skill sets are, you know what their backgrounds are, and you can engage with them right away. That's honestly how I find people for finance, people that are transferring from other churches or have a background that may pertain to what we're doing. And I think it's really important to understand that. And I just think the diversity of experience is so important, because we all have different backgrounds. And, I think Robin and I work really well together because her background is different from mine, but they mesh very well. Ken and I really work together well because we have a lot of similar approaches, but very different experiences. Another thing that's very important with effective leadership is that you have to approach situations apolitically and appreciate the diversity of opinions. I don't think you can go into a committee meeting and a leadership situation and have your mind made up. You've got to be open to other ideas. Otherwise, what's the importance of a committee? Then you're just being a dictator. And that's sometimes what you'd like to do, but it's really important to appreciate the diversity of opinions. And that means treating all members fairly and with respect. I think if you don't do this, it really makes for a bad situation, and you're not going to have the respect of those members if you don't treat them with respect and fairly. And that means listening to all people's opinions and ideas, even if you don't agree. And a lot of times you won't, but don't put blinders on and don't cover up your ears. You've got to be very open to the different ideas. You may end up getting to where you think you should be, but it's got to be a collective opinion of the entire committee. I thought Ken's opening prayer was perfect because it's exactly how I feel about leadership. Effective leadership has to be efficient, fair, and inclusive. And it's really important that you have all three of these things. Fairness to me is just critical. Most of the organizations I ran were mostly all male, and they respected me because I was fair and I didn't play favorites. Fairness is absolutely critical. And another thing I don't have on the slide, but I've been thinking about a lot in the last couple of days, is communication. You've got to be a good communicator. You can't over communicate with your team. You've got to be able to communicate, get your message across, and stay on top of the communication and be inclusive. People should be outside of your committee may need to be communicated with as well. So I think communication, and that goes back to what I mentioned earlier, communicating among the different committees in a church is so important. That's no different than when I was communicating with my stores and with the buying organization and the supply chain, all the different organizations that I had to deal with. But it's really important to be efficient with your time. I'm going to talk more about that. Fair with everybody, but also inclusive and not making people feel excluded. Creating effective committee leadership. I know some people will disagree with me on this, and I've had pastors that have. A church is like a business, and you basically need to run it professionally and like you would any organization, a professional organization. But in a church, and this is coming from the finance chair, you've got income and you have expenses, and your expenses can't exceed your income. So you've got to really make sure that all fits together. So that's how I really approach what I do and why I enjoy finance so much. But also a lot of the members on my committee have that similar background. So I think when you have nominating committees, first of all, I think they should know the background and skills of the church members. I know that's hard in a big church, and I'm looking in a smaller church now, but it's really important to know the backgrounds of the people coming into the church. I have a new person on my team. She's my new assistant finance manager, which I haven't had. And we didn't know that she has her master's in finance and was a vice president of operations for CenturyLink. Well, you know, what a perfect fit. But that hadn't come up with the nominating committee. And Pastor Fred learned about it. And so she's now on the committee. But that's the kind of thing we want to know when we're getting members on committees, is knowing the skills of the new members. That's why I said I attend the new member lunches, so I can figure out where people would fit on my team. But I think new members particularly bring new ideas and experiences. We have two couples that have joined the last year, right after the COVID. They moved to this area, Saddlebrook and Sun City. And they have been Methodists forever and been in a lot of churches. And the ideas they're bringing are just amazing. And it's just so exciting to have all these new ideas coming in. And one couple has been in 2 churches for a very long time in 2 different parts of the West. And they have great ideas. And the other couple the same way. So I think it's really fun to get new members involved. Plus, a new member, if they're asked to be involved, they're immediately connecting with the church. You all know, if you join a church, and this has happened to me, you join a church, you fill out the little card, they tell you, say what you'd like to get involved in, and no one ever contacts you. And I think it's critical that we engage new members right away and do that through the nominating committee. I think committee chairs with proven leadership experience if that works very well, or professional skills such as management, the military, human resources, finance, engineering, operations. Those are really important if you can find them. But I also think there's lots of people who have great leadership experience who maybe don't have those kinds of background. And I know of many people, including in my own family, people who have not worked professionally, but they've been in committees and organizations forever. One of my really good friends in Prescott, who I was in AAUW with, never worked professionally. She was a stay-at-home mom, but she was in a lot of organizations, and she had as much leadership experience as just about anybody that we had in the group, because she'd been very involved in a number of organizations. So it's important if you can find professional skills or leadership skills in your members. The next thing I feel really strongly about, and I know that we don't really do it, is conducting training for committee chairs in January at the beginning of the year. So the people that don't know what to do, you can really teach them the basics of leadership and how to manage their committees. I think that would be a real help, and I'm not saying that we're doing it. I think it's a great idea. The other thing that I feel personally that I've always done, I feel really strongly about, is when you bring new people onto your committee, have an orientation session in January so you can teach them about the expectations of the committee, what the participation will be, what's important, the meeting format, the reports. And in finance, that's pretty complicated, but missions has reports. Other groups have reports, and it's important to understand that. And then the expectations of the committee members. So I do this every January, and I have some people who go through it 2 or 3 times just because it helps them understand what we're doing and how we're going to operate. Now, the next page, Sharon, the meeting operating rules. And I will tell you, these are Sharon's meeting operating rules. I was pretty much, people who came to my meetings at Sears knew what was expected because they've been coming for so long, or my team meetings, they knew what I expected, because I'm really kind of I shouldn't say dictator, but I'm very set in how I want to see a meeting run. I think you are being rude to people if you don't respect their time and try to be as efficient as possible with the meeting. So I really feel strongly about being a stickler about these things. One thing is a monthly meeting is not required. Just because you have a committee and you think you have to have a meeting, you don't need to have a meeting every month. That's something we try to do. We don't have a church council meeting every month. We don't have finance. We do about 8 a year, and we try to do them back to back so that we're not, because so many people are on both committees, we're not wasting their time. Content or action needed should determine the necessity for a meeting. I won't have one in July and August because there's not much going on. I try not to have one 3 or 4 months in a row, but if we need one, we can always call one, or we can do a Zoom meeting. And I'll talk about that in a minute. Attendance is expected. And that should be something, again, the new members need to understand that they're expected to attend. Non-attendees should be asked to resign. And I've had to do this, not in the church setting, but I had to do it with another committee I ran for another organization in Prescott, because the person was not attending. And I kept attendance. And we had to be really blunt about it. But if a person is asked to be on your committee, you want them to be effective and involved, and they can't be if they don't attend the meetings. And then they're taking up the spot for somebody who can really be a benefit to you. Minutes, agendas, I feel very strongly about. I think you have to have an agenda. It has to be well thought out and sent out at least a week in advance. That really helps understand what you're going to be talking about. And also you can see if there needs to be something added, but absolutely required. Minutes should be required as well. When I took over the committee I'm running now, they didn't have minutes. They never had an agenda, and they hadn't done an audit in several years. Well, I don't know how long, but it just wasn't run effectively like a committee should be. I tend to do the minutes for my meetings because I want them done right away. And I do overmanage that, but it's really nice to have a secretary. Robin is the greatest meeting secretary in the world for the church council. She does an incredible job, but she has a lot of really strong background in that area. But I think you have to have the minutes, and it's really technically required, because it can be proof in a court of law that somebody was in attendance at a function. So it's a really important thing. This is a real important thing to me. At the beginning of the meeting, remind people, if they're on Zoom, to go on mute, but turn off your cell phones, and no side conversations. I think this is the rudest thing possible, is having a side conversation. I had 2 guys in Prescott who knew me very well because they had been in my meetings before, but they tend to have side conversations. So what I did in the future is I had place cards, and they had to sit next to me, one on either side. That way they couldn't talk to each other anymore. And then they got the message, but you don't want to have side conversations. And this one, Ken and I are absolutely non-negotiable about: begin on time and end on time. No excuses. You just have to begin on time. It's respectful, and ending on time is also respectful. I worked, had a dotted line reporting relation to General Gus Pagonis when he came to Sears to run the supply chain, one of the last jobs I had. He had stand-up meetings. And Ken, you've probably done this in the military, but he had stand-up meetings. We'd meet every day. He'd have all of his report directs report in briefly, 2-3 minutes, 30-minute meeting, stand up, and you're gone. And I thought that was a great idea because he really controlled the flow. The other thing that I don't have on the slide is, we all are in churches that have a lot of snowbirds. And I tend to have a meeting in the summer, but I do it on Zoom. And we do that because we do have some snowbirds, and they want to stay involved. And that way they can be. One of the things I found out with Zoom, and I think this is a real enlightening comment that you may not have heard before. I mentioned before that we started the Zoom Bible study 3 years ago, and this is our 4th year. And we started it 2 weeks before the lockdown. Well, then we had to meet on Zoom. There's 12 women. It's basically the same group. They do not want to stop meeting on Zoom. They want to do that rather than meet in person. And the reasons are not what you would think. This came up when we were kind of analyzing our Zoom approach. Many of them are introverts, and they feel when you have the gallery view that people see each other's faces. So you see all 12 people. They feel that you can see each other and that people are more open and sharing in a Zoom environment than they would be around a table in a meeting room where someone can be more dominant and and other people not as involved. So they really want to stay on Zoom. And I found that extremely interesting, that they feel more comfortable sharing and talking on the Zoom environment. So at this point, we're doing Zoom meetings and continuing it, and we are going to for the foreseeable future. Okay, the next slide, please. Your agenda, which, as I said, is really important, I think needs to be supportive of your church's missions. I think it should have the United Methodist or Church mission statement that we always have on the bulletin. It needs to have your committee mission statement. And if you don't have one, I would suggest you draft one with your committee so that you're all on the same page about what you want your committee to accomplish. One of the things we started including on the church council agenda, and we have it on finance, are the annual church goals, so that we're all aware of what they are and how we fit into supporting them. If you have expected outcomes, I would add those to the agenda so they don't get lost. And then the next meeting date. Now, this is pretty simple, but it's, I think, a good solid agenda, and it really gives everybody in your committee what they need to know. Next page, please. And my last meeting operating rules. I'm really a zealot about having a meeting that's an hour or less. And I think that is respectful of people's times. Church council is an exception because you have more to cover. But if you do have to have a longer meeting, please take a health break every 90 minutes. That is a really important thing to do for, first of all, for attention span, but people need to get up and they need to have a little break. So, but try to keep your meeting short. There's no reason usually to have more than an hour. One of the things that we do in finance, and we do it, and it really came out of church council, is not all groups need to report. You can have a written report that's submitted beforehand and included in the minutes. And that is really good for some of the reports for subgroups and groups that just don't really have that much to report on. If you have people who talk too much, and usually you do in some committees, limit their presentation time by putting the times on the agenda. And for each person, if you have to do that. I haven't found that necessarily needed lately, but I've done that in the past when you have people that talk too much. And then if you have a long-winded presenter, you may need to do some coaching beforehand and just have them cover the high points. Then they can add the additional written report on the back of it. That way you're not wasting people's time again, because you all know if somebody keeps going on and on and on, they lose the attention of everybody in the room. So you might as well limit it going forward. Next slide. What is good at facilitation? I subscribe to a newsletter, this news called Axios. And last week they had a great comment about ambiguity and how ambiguity is a real detriment to businesses because people don't know what's expected of them. And the quote was, ambiguity is a silent killer due to leaders offering hazy direction. I thought that was very appropriate. So what is good facilitation? I think it's important to begin with introductions if everyone doesn't know each other and introducing guests. And one of the things I think is respectful, the first meeting of the year, introduce new members and let them just give a brief comment about their background. I think that helps them feel that they're included and everyone know more about them. You need to facilitate, encourage discussion. And that is really bringing it out of people, getting them to participate and involving all members. When you have a topic that needs discussion, if someone hasn't spoken up, it's okay to ask if they have any thoughts. And you don't need to do it in a negative way or being very confrontational. The next thing is really important. If you have a rambling conversation or discussion or something that's getting too controversial, table it and move on and make sure that you're not losing control, but revisit it at the next meeting and put it under old business. Don't ignore it, but you may need to do some legwork behind the scenes if it's gotten to be too controversial. And that definitely can happen. Be open to and respect diverse opinions and questions. And this is really important, but it's really making sure that I've said this before, respecting the diverse opinions and questions. I think right now I'm going to talk some more about this later on, but I think we aren't always listening to the diverse opinions, and too often only one opinion will be controlling the conversation. So those are my thoughts about facilitation and good committee leadership. I want to just make a few comments about this book and then we'll open it up for questions. When I was working, for the last 30 years, I'm a big fan of audiobooks. And when I was working, I subscribed to a series that was their business books or leadership books. And you get a cassette and you got then like a Cliff Notes version of it. And I listened to a million books, not a million, but a whole bunch. Well, the best one I ever listened to that I used extensively was 7 Habits of Highly Successful People by Stephen Covey, who many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with. And it became kind of my Bible. So I made sure all my district and region managers have it. It came out with a new version in the last few years. And I recently gave it for Christmas presents to some family members who have just graduated from college. Stephen Covey, for those who don't know him, was an author, a businessman, an educator, and an author. His books were very influenced by his faith and his values. He was raised in Utah, was a lifelong member of the LDS Church. He died in a biking accident in 2012, but I think he's just one of the best there is. This new version I got is on Amazon, and it's, I think, just as pertinent to church leadership as to leadership in any other walk of life. Next slide. I'm going to briefly go through these and not really talk about them much, but it'll give you an idea what he talks about. His first habit is to be proactive. This is personal vision. This is all about act or you'll be acted upon. So you better take the action. The second is personal leadership. I love this one. Begin with the end in mind. This is all about visualizing your outcome. And an example he uses is, how do you want to be remembered at your funeral when people are giving eulogies about you? And if you don't like what you're thinking about and you're not living the life the way you want to be remembered, you can change that now, but that's personal leadership. Are you really the person you think you should be? The next one, put things first. This is personal management, and procrastination is probably one of the most devastating things that can happen. We want to avoid procrastination, and this really pertains to things we're doing in the church as well as our personal lives. So encourage personal management. I love this quote. Things that matter most should never be at the mercy of things which matter least. I think that's very appropriate. Number 4, in this one, I think is critical. These next two are really important for the church leadership. Think win-win. And that is one that we always try to concentrate on in my business groups. This is about human interactions involving everyone and challenging teams to look for the win-win solutions and ideas, which involves compromise and negotiations. And that is hugely missing today in our government, and it's missing in the church, looking for win-win solutions. And we're not doing it at higher levels. We should be doing it in our own organizations. Seeking first to understand and then be understood. This is a kind of a parenting thing, but it's principles of empathic communication. And we've talked about this today, but respecting each person equally and listening equally despite your differences. My mother, you know, mothers always have great sayings, but my mother was very big on not passing judgment. And she always said, never judge someone till you walk a mile in their shoes. And I think that is really important, to put yourself in the shoes of the other person and try to understand where they're coming from. And the last two are synergize, which is creative cooperation. And this is what I was talking about among teams within the church. This is all working together and maintaining balance. The last one is important personally. It's called balanced self-renewal. And this is true throughout your life. This is preventing an unbalanced life. And I know we've all gone through this where things get out of balance. It's mental renewal and physical renewal. And, you know, I'm retired, as many are. In retirement, as well as professionally and personally, take an inventory of what's important to you and then act upon it. I think with COVID, we all had to do that a bit and step back and maybe give up some things. We made decisions to give up things that weren't just as important as they could be to us. And I know I certainly did. So I don't play bridge anymore because I didn't like the time I was spending doing that when I could do things that were more important. So the last slide I have, I just think this is a great quote too. And I've given this a little editing, and the words woman were not in here before. Ezra Taft Benson is a former Secretary of Agriculture, but he was also president of the LDS Church. And this is out of the Covey book. The Lord works from the inside out. The world works from the outside in. The world would mold men and women by changing their environment. Christ changes men and women who then change their environment. The world would shape human behavior, but Christ can change human nature. So that is what I wanted to share with you. I want to thank Alberta and Jeannie and Ken for their help. And I'd love to open it up for some questions.
So,
yes.
Go ahead.
of all of your experiences in business and in church and other committees, is there a single mantra, a single point that you would like to stress as probably the most dominant thing you'd want to let us know?
I think you said it in the proverb, prayer, Ken, but I think effective leadership is efficient, fair, and inclusive. To me, that's it. It's fair. I preach that and preach that. It's all about the teamwork, fairness, inclusiveness.
Thank you.
Jeannie?
I have a question, if I could revisit the agenda.
Mm-hmm.
On your agenda, I did not see your new business, old business headings and, you know, who's going to be reporting under that. Why was that missing on there?
Well, no, I think that's a very good point, and it should have been on there. But you should have new business and old business. No, absolutely. You're absolutely right.
I thought I might have been too old school or out of
No,
it.
no, you're not. No, it's a great point. Thank you for including that.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Sharon,
Yes.
are you familiar with Ken Blanchard?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I've read his books.
He's another person that I look to for
Yes.
leadership training.
Yeah.
And
You know, there's so many good ones that have been around a long time, but yeah, Ken Blanchard's very good. And I think it's good as we move through life to keep reading books like that, because they do give you ideas and inspirations. And you can reread some of these books.
Well, Ken never came to Christ until he was just about at retirement age.
Yeah.
And he has just been a strong force in bringing other people to Christ too.
Yeah, that's a great point.
David, it sounds like you might be volunteering to do a leadership talk.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
So at the risk of interrupting, on our website, we have a list of things to read and view for those of you that are interested. It's a great list of resources. It's wide and varied, and I believe that Blanchard's books are listed there.
dscumc.org. When you scroll to the bottom, Clergy and Lay Leadership Development.
Yep.
You select that. Okay. Anyway, so when you scroll down on that, now I'm going to be lost. You see at the bottom of the page, book recommendations. And you select any of them. And you can see manner of books that are available that have been recommended.
There's a lot of great information on the website.
Yep, it's an extensive list, great resources, and we keep adding to it. So Sharon, thank you very much for your time and interesting information on this topic. Obviously, you're an expert. I know you're an expert, and you know that I know you're an expert, right? So thank you again. I appreciate it. We hope those of you who attended have enjoyed our presentation and that you'll join us again. We go dark for the summer. Our next leadership discussion will be in September. So do stay posted, because we have many talented and interesting speakers just like Sharon. And thank you again. I appreciate that. So would you like to do the honor of a closing prayer?
Okay. Everlasting God, strengthen and sustain all those who volunteer in our churches, that with patience and understanding they may love and care for your people, and grant that together they may follow Jesus Christ, offering to you their gifts and talents through him who lives and reigns with you and the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen. And thank you all again.
Thank you, Sharon.
Sharon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was good.
Thank you. My pleasure.